Our scripture today comes from the book of Deuteronomy. These are the commands, decrees, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, O Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates.
Thank you very much. So we are continuing our year-long series entitled The Unfolding Story from Genesis to Revelation, because we understand that the Bible is one continuous story that connects all of humanity, generation to generation, and to all of creation. Now, this sermon is entitled The Basic Rules. And if you grabbed one of the little cards that lists our scriptures, you'll see that there were two scripture readings I could have chose from. And I could have easily chosen Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 1 through 21. Anybody know what's in Deuteronomy chapter 5, verses 1 through 21? Anybody? The Ten Commandments. All right? That's where the Ten Commandments sit. And so to have a sermon entitled The Basic Rules, I mean, it makes sense. Why didn't I use the Ten Commandments? Well, the reason I did, first of all, because it's too easy. But secondly, I wanted to focus on these verses because they build upon the importance that God put on listening, on taking heed of the commandments we were given. Because I would say, in general, we could all recite the Ten Commandments. We might not know all of them, but we have a pretty good idea. When I was younger, my dad was my Sunday school teacher. I don't remember this, but we were younger. Well, both of us. I was younger than he was. But he had us come up with the Ten Commandments. And apparently the only one I could come up with, or at least the first one I came up with, was thou shalt not commit adultery. Why that was the one that clicked for me, I have no idea, but that's the one I remember. But as we consider the basic rules of our faith and what it means as a follower of Christ, it also reminds me of something else, what the word Bible means. B-I-B-L-E. Anybody ever heard what B-I-B-L-E? Not the song. I know some of you are already starting to sing it, right? No. Bible. Anybody know what it means? Anybody ever heard this? Basic instructions before leaving Earth. So I just thought that was kind of clever. That's not what it actually means. I'm just saying that was something I was taught as a kid. So when we look at these scriptures here, the scriptures that Kathy read, these are actually part of the Shema prayer in the Jewish faith. This prayer is said twice a day, morning and evening. And in fact, Jesus would have recited a prayer like this. It would have been in Aramaic, but he would have recited this prayer as well. Now, Shema means listen, heed, or hear. And the Jewish people take this prayer very, very seriously. And we know this because they actually follow the writing here. Matt, can you show that picture? Because as you can see, look at their arms. That is them actually binding it to their arm, and you can see the little boxes on their foreheads. They actually do this. Just kind of an interesting side note. if they bind it to their weak hand. So if you're right-handed, you bind it to your left hand. Just kind of sharing that. These are called tefillins, and they're a pair of small black boxes with straps that are worn during their prayer time. They're also known as phylakes, or prayer boxes, and they are a reminder of the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might, from Deuteronomy 6:5. And they do this because Deuteronomy 6:8 says, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. They actually take it very literally. They actually do this. And you may see, if you've seen pictures of people praying at the Wailing Wall, many of them would be having these items on them as well. And you may remember a little bit more of the scripture where it says to put them on your doorposts and on your gates. It actually has the Shema prayer on it. This is put on the Jewish family's door, and there's a little scroll that's put behind it. And that is actually mounted again onto the doorpost. If anybody wants to come check this out after service, you're welcome to do it. It is kind of cool. But yeah, they take this prayer incredibly serious. There is no question that they have a commitment, an outward sign of their commitment to the basic rules that God has given them. Now, it's not only seen in what they wear, but in their prayer and how they pray. Now, I'm going to ask you, do Christians have anything like that? It's not a trick question. Well, we have the Lord's Prayer, but what's an outward sign? Just a simple cross. I mean, that goes across. Yes, rosary would be especially for the Catholic faith. You're absolutely right. And we do have the Lord's Prayer that we recite, but we don't tie the Lord's Prayer to our forehead or anything like that. Although many people probably have the Lord's Prayer in their home. Anybody have the Lord's Prayer in their home? Yeah, it's put on the wall, and you recite it on a regular basis. And this is showing our commitment to Christ. It's an outward symbol of our commitment. And interestingly enough, we are called to a different, though very similar, set of basic rules. Now, in Mark chapter 12, Jesus actually references Deuteronomy 6:5 because he was asked by one of the religious leaders. Everybody remember this question he was asked? When he was asked, what is the greatest commandment? Now, understand that this was a religious leader of the time, of the Jewish faith. He was Hebrew. And so he was thinking, okay, I have the 10 commandments here. God, Jesus, which is the best one? What's the number one rule, basically? Now, interestingly enough, the Jewish faith do not call them the 10 commandments. They call them the 10 statements or sayings, just in case you're interested. But the point being that Jesus was asked, which is the greatest? And he had 10 to choose from. And which one did he pick? Technically, none of the above. Because what he said was, the most important one is this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your souls, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. Now, you may say, now wait a second. He was asked for one, he gave two. What's the deal? This is where it's so important for us to understand the context, the history of Scripture. Because when we read it in English, it sounds like he's giving two, doesn't it? But if you read it in the original language, you study it in the original context, what he was saying is, here's this, and right alongside it is this other one. You can't separate them. They go hand in hand. They are not possible to be separated. And that's what he was saying. They cannot be separated. They are equally important. They go hand in hand. Because for us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength, Jesus is not only going back to the original Deuteronomy reading, which the Hebrew people would have known, but he was also showing a connection to the Gentile people, the new people that were coming in. The Gentiles, that's all of y'all and me, right? We're not of the Jewish faith. And so he wanted to show how important this connection to them was. And then he continued on because, according to Jewish tradition, the concept of loving your neighbor as yourself is found in Leviticus 19:18, which is a core tenet of Judaism. It's a core aspect. It's a vital, intricate aspect of Judaism. And it means that to truly love God is to also love your neighbor. They're so interconnected, they're inseparable, they cannot be defined differently. So again, to love the Lord your God means that you must love your neighbor. Now, sometimes Jesus kind of gets confusing, and I think that's why people like to go back to the Ten Commandments, because it seems pretty simple, doesn't it? Well, it's very clear-cut. All right, Jesus is like, well, you got to think about what you're doing, and you got to pay attention. Ten Commandments just lays out the simple rules. And Jesus gets complicated with this Mark 12 writing, doesn't he? But is it really? Because if you think about it, honestly, the Ten Commandments can be simplified even more and go right under love God, love neighbor. Let me explain. The first 4 commandments are all about what? Anybody know? Loving God. The next 6, all about, come on, it's an easy one, loving your neighbor. They literally cannot be separated. So can anybody tell me at any time where somebody says, so I only want to do the first 4 of the 10 commandments and not the next 6? Of course not. Just like the Mark reading where it says, love God, love neighbor, that cannot be separated, you cannot separate the 10 commandments. They are the 10 commandments. So loving God, loving neighbor cannot be separated out. So the 10 commandments cannot be separated. And Jesus was taught from a young age the concept of loving God is shown in loving neighbor. And this is why he restated it. Because he wanted to remind his Jewish brothers and sisters and siblings, remember this? And then he was sharing it with the new believers and saying, this is what you need to know too. The basic rules of Christianity, of followers of Christ, are this: love God, love neighbor. New Testament scholar Douglas Hare said this. He said, in an age when the word love is greatly abused, it is important to remember that the primary component of biblical love is not affection, but commitment. Warm feelings of gratitude may fill our consciousness as we consider all that God has done for us. But it is not warm feelings that Deuteronomy 6:5 demands of us, but rather stubborn, unwavering commitment. Similarly, to love our neighbor, including our enemies, does not mean that we must feel affection for them. To love the neighbor is to imitate God by taking their needs seriously. Now, some people may be confused by this because it almost sounds like I'm taking the concept of love out of the equation, right? Let me ask this. And remember, we're in church and we're going to be honest with each other. Have there ever been times where you're still going to follow God, but there's sometimes you don't love him? When something bad happens? When something really terrible happens? When a young life is taken? When there's war and genocide? And you wonder, can I love God in this? Now, again, I'm pointing out love is very, very important, but it's commitment more than anything. Or let me make it more simple. How many of you, when you had kids, there were times that you struggled to love them? Right? Right? But you still have a commitment to them, don't you? You still have a connection to them. You will still watch out for them. So to love others is actually to put love of God into action. And it's not about not hating them or treating them with indifference. It's about seeing the worth that Jesus sees in them. We must commit ourselves to those who are also like us, but also those who are not like us, in thought, in act, in look, in sexuality, in gender, or belief. Now, there's a special word for this type of love. I'm sure many of you have heard this word before. Anybody want to guess what word I'm talking about? This ultimate form of love? Agape. Agape love. So maybe you've heard this word and had no idea what it actually means and were afraid to ask. I'm going to explain. Agape love is love in action. It's selfless. It's unconditional. It's patient. It's compassionate. And here's the thing. If you state that you love God but are not committed to the needs of your neighbor, I'll be honest with you, you don't truly love God. That may seem harsh, but that sure seems like what Scripture is telling us. So this time of year, I always I enjoy this time of year. Probably not for the same reason you all do. My wife sells Pampered Chef. And it's this time of year that the new catalog comes out. Now, I will tell you, Pampered Chef is not the cheapest stuff, but it's good stuff. And we have quite a collection. I will say I'm very appreciative of the discounts she gets. And to flip through that catalog and see the new pots and pans, and we've got an air fryer, and the recipes and the seasoning and all of that, and I'll see stuff and be like, I have no idea what it is, but I think we need it. We have this great collection of these fun things. But if you don't love your neighbor, it'd be like us having all this stuff and never cooking. It's going to gather dust. It's not worth anything. And in fact, again, we have some seasonings. We have some mixes. If we don't use those, if those sit on the shelf, they're eventually going to spoil. God's love will spoil. Your love for God will spoil if you don't put it into action, if you don't love your neighbor. We need to understand the impact. Not only is this truly showing the love of God, but this is showing others what the love of God is like. The love of neighbors is like. I want you to, each and every one of you, to consider what it looks like to love your neighbor. If I cannot show love to everyone, whether I agree with them or not on lots of different things, and believe me, there's a lot of people I disagree with on a lot of different things, I can't say I love God truly. So my challenge for you for this week is to show your commitment to God by committing to your neighbors. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like. I honestly don't. Maybe it's giving somebody a smile when they're having, and you don't even know they're having a bad day, but that smile made a difference. Maybe it's buying somebody a tank of gas. Maybe it's buying somebody a dozen eggs, although you might have to take out a loan for that. But the point being, we need to commit to our neighbors. And that means loving them. Truly committing to them. So that's my challenge for this week. Let's bow our heads.